Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the What Next conversation. We've heard about some of the values that people have talked about this morning: free speech, free inquiry. What happens when the institutions we rely on abandon them? Should we channel our inner Burkean and try to rescue them? Or is it time to set them aside and build new ones? We have with us today three pioneers who are actually building new things to try to address this. And I want to just go down the line and hear a little bit about what you're doing. Scott Atlas, to begin with, you and I had a conversation. I interviewed you for Unheard in October 2020, when you were inside the White House on the coronavirus task force. At that moment of what now feels dystopian craziness, what did you feel, and how did it change what you believed about the institutions you've been living inside for all these years?
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Freddie, because this is one of my real concerns, is that we can't be tempted to turn the page. And I feel that there is a temptation here, not just here, but in the United States particularly. And I want to go through a couple of things. To me, why are we here at all talking about institutional reform, and can we even reform institutions at this moment when we've known for decades that we've had institutional failure in government, in the media, in educational institutions? And the answer really is, as you say, the pandemic, COVID. And why? Because it impacted us all so personally, unavoidably. You cannot deny it. It exposed the massive, across-the-board institutional failure, what I consider the most unethical, the most tragic breakdown of leadership in our lifetimes in free societies. And oddly, it remains the elephant in the room in many cases. People don't want to talk about it, but I'm going to say something factual briefly, and that is the basis of all rational discussion must be fact. Lockdowns were instituted. They failed to stop the spread. They failed to stop people from dying. That's the data, and they inflicted massive damage and death sinfully on the poor more than the affluent. And remember this, lockdowns were not caused by the virus. Human beings, leadership, decided to do the lockdowns. More than exposing this massive incompetence, more than a fundamental lack of critical thinking, it exposed the disappearance of what I consider society's moral and ethical compass, so pervasive that we have rightfully lost trust in our institutions. The question to me is, why did free people accept these draconian, unprecedented, and illogical lockdowns? That, to me, is the fundamental question. Now, we all know disruption is sorely needed, and we just elected the biggest disruptor in political history, President Donald Trump. This is an undeniable repudiation of the failed American leftist policies and what I consider their cultural perversions contrary to common sense. But it's also an important slapback at the biggest problem we face, and that is censorship, cancel culture. This is a much-needed pushback at that because it failed to convince the American voters. I'll finish up with 1 second, which is that what are we doing here? About it. In my personal experience, I've formed the Global Liberty Institute, which is focused on rising leaders early in careers, private sector, journalism, government, entertainment, and the arts. We're hooking them up with senior leaders who believe in freedom because we're trying to propel them into being the next set of leaders. We only ask one question on our application to join this program. What have you done to show personal courage?
Okay, thank you, Scott. Toby Young, ladies and gentlemen. I can't think of anyone who embodies this kind of paradox better. Toby has been a disruptor, has had his fair share of vilification over the years for holding the officially wrong opinions, and he has started a number of fantastic insurgent new institutions, most recently the Free Speech Union. And yet, earlier this month, he joined perhaps the deepest of the deep state members' clubs, the British House of Lords. Toby, explain this paradox for us. Should we fight from within the blob, or should we start new things from without?
Thank you, Freddie. First of all, ditto to everything Scott just said. I was a lockdown skeptic before it was fashionable. It was great that there were people like you standing up for lockdown skepticism in high places. So, Freddie, I started, if I can briefly just rattle through the story of why I started the Free Speech Union. I was appointed to a new higher education regulator in 2018. The offense archaeologists decided they weren't having that. They did a number on me. They searched through everything I'd said or written dating back to 1987. And because I've been a provocative journalist most of my career, it didn't take them long to find a Tutankhamun's tomb's worth of offensive material to be performatively outraged about. I had to step down from one position after another. I ended up stepping down from 5 different positions. And when that was happening to me, I desperately wanted, I really felt the lack of an organization that could give me good, professional, impartial advice about what to do when you find yourself at the eye of one of these storms. You know, should I keep quiet? Should I get out there and defend myself? If I apologize, will that make things better or worse? The answer, by the way, is worse. So when I'd recovered from being properly cancelled, I decided to start the organization that I desperately wanted when that was happening to me, when my career that I'd spent 40 years building up was just burning to the ground in front of my eyes. And that organization is the Free Speech Union. It started in a small way in 2020. 5 years later, we have 25 members of staff. We have 26,500 members. We're growing at a rate of 1,000 members a month. We fought over 2,300 cases. About half of those, almost half of those, have been women who got into trouble for asserting their belief in the biological reality of sex. People think that the front line in the free speech battle are people like me, conservative, middle-aged, male, but actually it is gender-critical women who are at the coalface, and I'm proud to say that we have defended over 1,500 TERFs in the course of the Free Speech Union's history. One of the most inspiring things about the success of the Free Speech Union is that it has been inspired other free speech unions to be set up in other countries. We now have free speech unions in New Zealand, in South Africa, in Australia, in Switzerland. This week, we started a free speech union in Canada. And the heads of all those international free speech unions are here in this hall. We want to start more. We've just set up the FSU International, just appointed John Benjamin, a former British ambassador, to run that. His job will be to help other groups in other countries replicate our success, set up free speech union in those countries. We need one in France. French delegation, come see us. We have a stall in the exhibition center. Come and see us, come and talk to us. I'll be there afterwards about how to set up a free speech union in France. And boy, do you need it. Le wokeism is rampant in France. You have some of the most censorious laws in Europe. You need the free speech union. We want to help you set one up. But Freddie, to answer your question.
Yes.
One of the things we found works most effectively is appealing to the law. The law can often be our friend. We have rights in this country, dating back in some cases to 1215, to the Magna Carta. I'll just give you one example of a recent success in which we appealed to one of those rights, the right to a trial by a jury of your peers. A British serviceman, Jamie Michael, posted a video on Facebook immediately after the tragic murder of 3 schoolgirls in Southport last year. He blamed, in that video, he blamed that attack on illegal immigration and asked people to protest in a peaceful way about uncontrolled illegal mass immigration. He got it wrong. The attack wasn't carried out by an illegal immigrant, but nevertheless, it was an innocent mistake. At the urging of 2 Labour politicians, the police prosecuted Jamie. He was charged with stirring up racial hatred, the maximum sentence for which is 7 years in jail. Not for actually participating in any of the riots, just for supposedly posting hurty words about what had happened. That's where we are now in our country. But he pled not guilty. He exercised his right, dating back to the Magna Carta, to a trial by a jury of his peers. We defended him. We found him a barrister, a solicitor. It took that jury 17 minutes to unanimously acquit him. So he's now a free man again. But that's how we fight back, Freddie.
Right, so the lesson there is insurgent energy, but making use, in some cases, of historic rights that are already there, rather than having to start from scratch. Will Inboden, you have embodied this yourself. You've founded a lot of institutions, but most recently you've taken on the task of starting an entirely new school within the University of Florida, centered on the teachings of Western civilization. You've just hired 50 faculty. Tell us about that.
Sure, thank you, Freddie. So one of the great achievements of Western civilization, one of the great drivers of Western civilization over the last 1,000 years has been the research university, especially in the UK and the US. Founded on the production of knowledge, the search for truth, free inquiry, diverse viewpoints, the formation of citizenship and character, and training the next generation of leaders. And as I pay tribute to all that, that's why we all care about universities. Yet I think I don't need to tell this room here that universities have horribly lost their way. Many have not only drifted from that original mission, but have actually turned against it, right? So many universities are now the centers, the main promulgators of attacks on Western civilization, of the denial of its values, the suppression of speech, trying to turn students against the broader values of the societies, the countries in which we're supposed to serve and be the next generation of citizens and leaders. And so what can be done about it? And I know one of the themes we've been thinking about at this conference is, do we found new institutions or do we reform existing ones? Well, my answer, as I said last night at dinner, is yes to both. And we're trying to do both. And particularly at the University of Florida, but also at other universities, in primarily public universities in American states such as Texas, University of North Carolina, Arizona State, and Ohio State. New schools are being founded within the existing flagship universities of the state. At Florida, it's the Alexander Hamilton Center for Classical and Civic Education, which I lead. And so we have the advantages of all the resources of the big university with the multi-billion-dollar endowments and the 60,000 students and the decades, the generations of alums. And yet we also have the authorities and autonomy of a new institution where we can hire our own faculty. The existing faculty who have driven the university in some very bad directions don't have veto authority over the ones we hire. We can create new majors and new degrees. And so we are refounding these new schools centered on Western civilization, on teaching the great books, on citizenship, and recovering these lost arts of learning in the Western tradition.
And Will,
yeah,
is it a conservative institution?
Yeah, so we are very self-consciously classically liberal, right? We believe in the virtues of a free society, but if you look at our faculty, you'll find that a much larger number of them would be identified as conservative than, say, your typical university faculty. Why is that? It's because unlike most other universities in their hiring practices, we don't regard being conservative as disqualifying. Right, and that's the problem of how so many universities have skewed the field over several generations. And so when you're generally open to broader views, when you're going to be teaching military history and diplomatic history and political theory and Shakespeare and Milton and all these these very important topics that have fallen out of favor, yeah, you're going to attract a more politically diverse group of faculty, many more of whom will identify more of the center right. But it's a pre-political project. The answer to the liberal and progressive indoctrination that so many universities have done is not really conservative counter-indoctrination. Students are too skeptical for that. They'll see through that. They just want to learn.
I want to bring in Toby and Scott on this. I feel like this is a central and not yet fully answered question, which is the mission here to build new free institutions where inquiry is protected, but they could go in any direction, including not the one that you like? Or is the mission here to build new conservative institutions? And Toby, what's your thought on that? And then we'll bring Scott in.
Well, free speech has been coded right-wing by its enemies, but it clearly is not a right-wing value, as Konstantin said. And we think of the Free Speech Union as non-partisan. And many of the people we've defended would be people who identify as being on the left. One argument I make to students who tell me that free speech is a right-wing value, and the only reason I'm standing up for it is because I want to defend male, pale, and stale conservatives like me, is that actually free speech is the friend of the powerless and the dispossessed. Without free speech, you cannot stand up for your rights. You can't fight for your rights. Without free speech, we wouldn't have had the suffragettes. We wouldn't have had the civil rights movement. We wouldn't have had the gay rights movement. Free speech is the friend of left-wing insurgents, just as it's the friend of right-wing insurgents.
And Scott?
Yes, I would echo that, and remember that when I was a little kid in the 60s in the US, free speech was the call of the far left. And I think it's fascinating that freedom, not just free speech, freedom has become politicized. This is something shocking, I think, to many of us. So what I believe is the key to this is the free exchange of ideas. That cannot be viewed as partisan or political. We must be able to speak and exchange and restore the debate, the tradition of debate in our universities, in the media, even in Hollywood and all of these other cultural influences.
So in your new institution, you're bringing new young leaders through. Are you looking for conservatively minded people, or are you looking for people of any political persuasion?
Well, like I said, there's only one question besides their CV. What have you done to show personal courage? And so we don't at all filter for political partisanship. In fact, our best exchanges are from people who have very differing views.
Final question, we don't have much time, but do you three feel that this group and the community of people who've been arguing for these kind of issues, for freedom of speech, against some of the issues Toby mentioned, have got used to the fact that the regime has changed? And that now there's, as J.D. Vance put it last week, there's a new sheriff in town. So they're no longer these protesters outside the citadel. In some sense, their guy is now the new regime. Do you feel that they've adjusted for that, or is there still a kind of lag on the new reality? Will, perhaps?
This is we are still in the early days. This is a generation-long struggle. The political winds may have shifted in some favorable circumstances. We're certainly feeling that in the United States and in Florida, where I'm living and working right now. But it took the progressive left a couple generations to take over and warp many of these institutions, and the work of building, reforming them and building a new one is a generation long. So I think complacency would be something to be cautioned against. We need vigilance, we need patience, and we need to build these things to last. And that's why we're being so careful in the screening process for the new faculty we're hiring, and we want to teach generations of students, and they will be the ones ultimately who will carry this forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have run out of time, but I know that these three gentlemen will be around and ready and keen to discuss freely and otherwise what they're up to and any questions you may have. So please join me in thanking our panel right now. Thank you.